In this episode, I'm going to share my thoughts on the Dewalt Flexvolt cutoff saw and how I used it on the concrete demolition stage of this project. Welcome to episode 3 of the deck build series. We're building a split level deck, but before I go any further, here's a sneak peek of upcoming projects that you're going to see here on this channel. We have a multi-room remodel and we've made a start on a new build. Be sure to click subscribe, turn on notifications. The momentum is building, so you do not want to miss out. A few months ago, Dewalt New Zealand sent me a few of their new power tools for me to test, use and review. And for the saw in particular, I have already done an initial review. That review was good, it was helpful, but I wanted to update it. The deck project is a perfect scenario to feature the use of the saw, simply because there is a lot of concrete that I needed to remove. At first, I thought I wasn't actually being realistic using the saw for this amount of concrete, but surprisingly, I was wrong and it exceeded my expectations. When I first used the Flexvolt saw, my initial impressions were positive. Things like the weight. It's obviously the first thing you notice. The saw is really lightweight. It's half the weight of the available concrete saws that I could get my hands on, which meant reduced fatigue, reduced body strains, and I could use the Flexvolt for longer periods of time. When you're holding it in both hands, the handles are positioned well and the weight is distributed evenly. And when you pull the trigger, thanks to the soft start, there's no kick. And then when you release the trigger, the blade comes to a stop fairly quickly. When I've used petrol saws in the past, after just a few hours, I've felt quite fatigued. The combination of the fumes from the petrol as well does get to me. There's no reason to have any specific controls in place to deal with fumes. It's all just battery powered. It's clean air, clean environment. It's good for you as the operator and it's good for those that are working in the vicinity as well. Which is another thing when you're working in a residential situation and you're working on someone's house. There's a lot less noise pollution. When you're cutting, you notice that the saw has a lot of power and you don't need to force it into the cut. And the speed of the cut was a reasonable speed. If you push the saw too hard, there is an overload light that comes on. The more I used it, the more I got used to seeing the indicator coming on and just backing off just enough that the light would turn off. So over time, I became more consistent in my cutting. The biggest question folks have about the saw, and usually the biggest criticism, is the runtime. The saw is power hungry and it can drain a battery in a very short amount of time. The batteries I was using were the Flexvolt 6A batteries. Not really recommended for the saw, but it's what I had, so it's what I used. Definitely you want to get your hands on the 12 amps when you're doing a big project like I was. Because the runtime is short, I staggered my cuts throughout the day, especially for the initial removal of the main pathway. And then it wasn't an issue later on when I was just doing smaller areas and smaller cuts. By staggering it, it meant I could use up the batteries that I had, chuck them all on the chargers. While they charged, I was able to remove what concrete I'd cut already, and then once I'd done that, stop for a break, my batteries were ready to go again. To do that initial path took 7 batteries all up. Each battery lasted around 3.5 minutes consistent use. I didn't find myself standing around with nothing to do, so it worked really well. Most house slabs and most pathways in my area are about 100mm thick, so the depth of the blade doesn't quite get to the bottom, but a well-placed hit with a sledgehammer can usually crack that last little bit. In a house slab situation where you're cutting out the floor for new surfaces on an alteration, that limitation can actually be a good thing. It means that you're not going to punch the blade through the waterproof membrane under the slab, and you can keep that intact, so when you put the concrete back in, you're maintaining the integrity of the waterproofing. Throughout the project, there were some smaller cuts that I needed to do. Maybe it was a small cutout for a timber pile, or removing some of that existing concrete retaining wall. One part I just needed to cut a nice angle on the corner of the retaining wall to make it look nice. I also had to cut a section out of the pathway at the rear of the house where the deck meets up. There's a ramp that we're building. The decking has to meet flush with that path, so I had to remove that section of concrete to create a lower section for the angled joist to sit on. These quick cuts were helped by a quick setup. All you need to do is grab the saw with the battery and the hose, plug it in, get the water running. It means that the saw is more likely to get used. Situations where you might have a little cut to do, where you can get away with ignoring it, you might just ignore it rather than trying to get your hands on a petrol saw, or you might have a small grinder without good dust extraction on it, and you might just decide to cut it, wear a mask and let the dust go into the air, or you might use a breaker and a chisel or something like that. But because the saw is so easy to grab, it just made it more appealing to grab and use it. I wish I had the saw a few years ago. I did a project where I demolished a concrete spa and I hired a petrol saw to do it, and I did what I could in the time that I had the hireage, and I did it as quick as I could to keep the hireage down. I was exhausted after that, and once I'd done that initial demolition, in the next few days there was still some concrete left behind, so I had to work that with a breaker because that's what I had. There was another project where I needed to cut a small strip drain into a concrete driveway in front of a building. I had to pay a concrete cutting contractor to come and do that for me, and that cost me about 4 times my hourly rate when I could have done it in 15 minutes with this saw. So that's a cost I had to pass on to the client. So in the interest of being competitive with their pricing, having better tools can help you keep the costs down for you and for your clients. With increasing awareness about the effects of silica dust on the lungs, the dust suppression by water is a really good solution. The dust doesn't make it into the air and it stays damp on the ground, making for an easier cleanup once the job's done. If you can get past the short runtime, which is subjective to your situation, to the project that you're working on, the saw is a worthwhile tool to have, especially if you're working with a lot of masonry. If your go-to option for cutting is a 9-inch grinder without dust extraction, you definitely need this saw. It's great for home remodel companies, great for landscapers. You would be able to utilize it much like we have in this project for removing old concrete paths and dealing with old masonry work, cutting chase and channels in existing slabs for new surfaces when doing a bathroom remodel, for cutting out old stucco claddings if you're extending a building or modifying existing windows. The saw gives you options to do the job quickly and cleanly. If you're already on the Flexvolt platform, you're already committed and you won't regret adding this saw to your collection. If you aren't on the Flexvolt platform, then this saw is a good excuse to get on the platform. That's it for now. I think I covered a lot, but if there's anything I missed, anything you're wondering about, chuck some questions in the comments. If there's anything you want to add from your experience from using this saw, absolutely throw it down in the comments. If you're enjoying my content, absolutely subscribe, absolutely turn on notifications, absolutely jump on Instagram, give me a follow. There's a lot that happens on Instagram. I'm doing stories regularly, most days, on my current projects. So if you want up to the minute updates, go to Instagram, give me a follow. In the next episode, I may be changing things up a little bit. I may launch my next build series, which is the remodel project. The deck series has been a little bit of hard work for me to get up to speed, just because of the way I did the filming on site. But I've actually completed about half of the remodel series, and it's sitting there ready to upload. So I might just overlap these. I may do a stint of the remodel series, and then come back and finish off the deck. But I just want to get things sped up. I want to get things a bit more real time. At the moment, we're working on a new build and we're filming there every day as well. So yeah, just gonna change it up a little bit. I hope you guys are happy with that. I hope you don't get too lost by it. It should only overlap by a few episodes. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. Have a good one.